welcome to the City of Indian Rocks Beach and our meeting tonight. Would you all like to stand with us to say the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Would you mind standing just for 10 seconds as we remember what today is, 9/11, and those that lost their lives? Thank you. You may be seated. Dan, would you please call the roll?
Commissioner Palumbo?
Here.
Commissioner Robel?
Here.
Commissioner Hanna?
Here.
Vice Mayor Wolfnagel?
Here.
Mayor Kennedy?
Here, thank you. Pinellas County Sheriffs, if you'd like to come forward and make your presentation. I'd like to tell all of you that 15 minutes before the meeting, the sheriffs are always here, and if you have a private matter that you would like to speak to them, you may do so at that time.
Good evening, I'm Sergeant Katzer of Pinellas County Sheriff's Office. For this month, we had 2 vehicle burglaries, one of which the vehicle was locked, but the window was partially down, so they were able to gain access to the vehicle. The other one, the vehicle was unlocked and left his wallet on the dash. As you can see on the sheet, it shows that we had 9 larcenies. I'm sorry, the burglaries were residents. One of them, the window was broken out, and I guess it's a rental property which is vacant at the time, and somebody broke in and been staying there a couple of days. That's been assigned to the detectives, and they're in the process of working that. The second one was some items were stolen off the back porch, which is a folding chair, and those were recovered, but that also, the items were processed and being worked by detectives. The larceny part, it comes into play with the 2 vehicles. That's why you can see it's up 1 by this month. But it's a combination of items being taken from people on the beach that go out swimming and leave their items sitting there unattended, unlocked vehicles, as well as patrons walking out on tabs. So we made a couple arrests with those in the last month. You can see on here that there's a sexual battery. There was an incident between a guy and a girl. They're both claiming opposite things. It's being handled by the detectives. Neither one of them resided in the city. So under this, we had 8 misdemeanor arrests. Deputies conducted 350 traffic stops, 257 house checks, dealt with like 52 suspicious persons reports.
Does anyone on the commission have any comment or question for the sheriff at this time?
I just have one question outside of this. I was asked by somebody if you have a vacation patrol for a sign up, so if somebody's going to be out of town, if you check it
Yes,
out.
I explained that it's been a while back, but in one of the meetings. Basically, we have a program where they can call up the sheriff's office. They'll give their address, explain when they're leaving, the dates that they're going to be gone, and that they're requesting house checks be done. And it goes into our system. They'll have it put into our system where it shows that the house checks. And so when the deputies are patrolling or when they pull it up during their shift, they'll see that there's certain houses, like on here, like I said, the house checks, we did 257 of those house checks in that month. So those are people that have put in for their houses to be checked.
Great.
So that's how they would go about doing that.
Awesome, thank you.
Yep.
Is there anyone else? very much tonight. This is public comment. Any member of the audience may come forward, give their name and address, and state any comment or concern that they may have regarding any matter over which the City Commission has control, excluding agenda items. All statements made to the City Commission shall be made to the City Commission as a whole, not directed to any individual City Commission member, and no personal or slanderous remarks shall be permitted. No speaker shall be interrupted, and there is no debate. And you have 3 minutes. Is there anyone who'd like to come forward?
Good evening. My name is Lindsay Cross. I live at 545 27th Avenue North in St. Petersburg. I'm here because I'm running for Florida State Senate in District 24, which includes Indian Rocks Beach. And I wanted the chance to address you and introduce myself. I'm running because I'm very concerned about our natural environment, what's been happening with our water quality, and also how Tallahassee has been taking away control from local municipalities such as Indian Rocks Beach. I'm an environmental scientist. I've been working for nearly 2 decades to protect drinking water supply, to improve water quality, and protect habitats like beaches and wetlands. I know that it's so important for us to have a healthy environment because it's the backbone of a healthy economy and really adds to the quality of life that we have here. I'm running for Florida State Senate because I know that I can be part of the solution. I was involved for nearly 14 years with the Tampa Bay Estuary Program, and during that time, we saw a turnaround in the quality of water in Tampa Bay. We took it from a nearly polluted estuary that was considered dead. It was so polluted, and we made it into a jewel of our region and an economic driver. So I know I can bring that same spirit up to Tallahassee. I've also worked on very tough issues related to beach erosion, flooding, and other things that are affecting our natural environment. The red tide that we're seeing right now, I think, is disgraceful. I know that it's not only affecting our fish and wildlife, our human health, but it's also starting to affect our tourist economy, and that is very important to me. I'm also an advocate for improving our public schools. I'm the daughter of 2 public school educators, and I want to reinvest our tax dollars back into our public school system so that all of our children have a chance to get a great education. And I'm also very concerned about the lack of access to affordable health care, and we'll work to make sure that everyone in our communities has that access and is part of that solution. I know that here in Indian Rocks Beach and throughout the district, there are a lot of other issues that are affecting you locally related to home rule, short-term rentals, and I think, frankly, that it's disgraceful that our leaders in Tallahassee have been taking away your rights to do what is best for your communities. I think as elected officials, the mayor and the city commission know what's best for your communities. People have moved here because of the quality of life, because they want to raise their families here or have a wonderful retirement, and taking away your rights for zoning and regulating the things that are important to your citizens, I think is going to degrade the quality of life here. So those are some things that I will fight for in the Florida State Senate to make sure that Indian Rocks Beach continues to be one of the jewels of our region. And again, I appreciate this opportunity to address you. I look forward to being an advocate for you, to listening to you, and honestly taking the things that are important to you, taking it up to Tallahassee. Again, my name is Lindsay Cross. I'm running for Florida State Senate in District 24. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Cross. Is there anyone else who'd like to make public comment at this time? Please come forward.
Here we go.
No, you come forward.
Hi, I'm Bob Griffin, 375 La Hacienda. First of all, Sheriff, where'd you go? One's still here. They do a good job when you tell them to come inspect your house while you're out of town. I've done that twice. We installed cameras on our house about a year ago, and we were in San Francisco, and every time they walked around our house at 7 a.m., at 4 a.m., my wife's cell phone went off. So that's kind of humor. Who's in our backyard? And was one of them. They do a very good job. Number 2, I wanted to mention the Stralis campaign has expanded well beyond Indian Rocks Beach. We did get all but one restaurant here to openly agree to go strawless. Strawless means don't give somebody a straw unless they ask for it. So it doesn't mean they've thrown their straws away. That one restaurant, I've yet to be able to talk to their manager because they're never there, so I may go for 100% soon. As you know, I produced this magazine, and we printed the names of all the restaurants on the beach. I probably talked to 2/3 of them, and there's 250 restaurants from Clearwater Beach to Paso Grill that have agreed to do this. I had the help of a couple of Chamber of Commerce's, a couple of cities. I didn't do it by myself. I brought some extra copies of this magazine I'll give you when I get through talking, and anybody that wants a copy, I have a short stack on the back chair there. Thirdly, I wanted to ask if any progress has been made on approaching whoever, DOT, about painting the bridge, putting our logos on it. I haven't heard anything. I did bring this up about 5 months ago, and I just haven't heard anything. I know you've been involved with budgets, and I'd like to reconsider the idea of approaching DOT or whoever needs to be talked to about painting our name on the bridge the same way Treasure Island has done it, with a sign that says, "Welcome to Indian Rocks Beach." Thank you.
Thank you, Bob.
I'm going to leave all these over here, so not to interrupt.
My name is Ruth Coopy. I live at 104 11th Avenue, down the road. And my concerns are in regard to the short-term rental. I actually...
Ms. Ryn, you will have time to do that at appropriate
when you
time,
talk
6
about-
p. Yes, ma'am. Would that be okay?
That's fine.
Okay,
Nope,
thank you very
I
much.
just want to make sure
All
I'm
right.
anxious about this because it correlates with the pollution issue that we're all
Okay.
about.
Is there anyone else who'd like to speak at this time? Please come forward.
Hi, good evening. Julie Hoofnagel, 2 Fifth Avenue, Indian Rocks Beach, and I'm actually here as the president of Action 2000. I wanted to thank the city for their partnership in the September 8th, last Saturday, our county park cleanup, where we put down mulch. Really couldn't have done it without the help of the city and the partnership of the city. We have other partners, but I'm sad that Calvin's not here because I really wanted to thank Calvin tonight because he really helped, and also Drew and Pete and Mike, but also Mayor Yu for being a captain, and Phil for taking photos, and also Nick for being a captain, and Ed for being my husband and helping me out as well. Really a nice job, and it's a nice partnership, and I just wanted to thank you for everything.
Thank you. It was a great day. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak during public comment at this time? I'm going to close the public hearing. This is the report of the city attorney. You have a report, sir?
Nothing to report.
Okay. Report of the city manager.
Thank you. Good evening. I have 3 things. Dean, I'm going to put you on the spot. Give a brief update about FDOT and the bridge, since Bob wants an update.
Yeah, we've reached out to FDOT, and they actually have a liaison for those type of requests and stuff like that. The permit is quite a daunting permit, and some of their maintenance requests. I'm still obtaining cost factors to get that because it's not only the installation process, but it's annual maintenance and certifications for professional engineers of the product you're going to put on there. So I'm proceeding forward, but I'm trying to just, it's a daunting task, as I mentioned, with all the elements that DOT is requesting.
Thank you, Dean.
Just have a couple other items. One is, I want to give the commission and the public an update about red tide. Fortunately, our county government, Pinellas County, has been very proactive in what they're doing. They've hired DRC, Emergency Services, and if you walk down the beach during the daytime at night, you'll see shrimp boats out there. And what they're trying to do, they're trying to scoop up as many of the dead fish out in the Gulf before they hit the beach, and that's been a huge help. But they're doing that 24 hours a day. What we're doing is a daily monitoring the beach. We've not had a lot of fish on the beach. The ones that we've had, we began the process today of hand picking those up. If we get to the point where it's more than a hand pickup, thanks to BP, we have a brand new tractor and a mechanical rake that we can take to the beach and pick up material, but hopefully we won't get to that point. So I just want to give the commission that we have daily communications with the county. I actually had a visit today from the project manager from DRC, which is the company that the county's hired. And we actually have access now to a nonprofit, so if we come across any birds that are ill from the red tide, we can call them, they'll come out and pick them up and try to rehab them. So we're on top of it, and hopefully we won't see a lot of fish like they saw down in Sarasota, because like I said, Pinellas County is really doing a great job trying to capture the dead fish out in the Gulf before they hit the beach. The only other thing I had was, at the last meeting, we had a resident that addressed the commission about paid parking lots, and that primarily is in the business district. The land development code that we have does not allow for commercial paid parking lots. And if the commission was interested in that, what the process of that would be is that we would, through Hetty, our planner, we would send that to the planning commission and let them deal with it at that level, and then they would send something back up to the commission in terms of a recommendation whether to do that or not. And I really just need some guidance from the commission if that's something by consensus y'all want us to spend some time on, that you're interested in, or not. And I'll answer a couple questions about that if you have questions about it.
Do we have a consensus that we'd like to address this further in a meeting?
I'd rather not even look at paid parking on our beach, because then it's just going to spread everywhere.
Is there anyone? This isn't in actual people who own a piece of property, is that correct?
Yeah, it's not the, yes, not, what we would be looking at, it would not be paid parking at the beach access. This would be whether the city wanted to do paid parking within the business district, the narrow business district.
We talked about this about 6 or 8 months ago, didn't we? Because he brought it up, he has brought it up in the past.
He brought it up, it was never,
We never wanted to move, as I remember, we never wanted to move
Ed, would you
forward.
like to?
I think it's something the planning commission should at least look at, absolutely.
Okay.
Agree? Yes.
Okay, then we have a consensus and we'll look at it.
That's all I have.
There's a consensus.
Yes,
I have a question.
yes.
Greg, could you talk just a moment back to the fish and about Pinellas County and what they're doing as far as costs to dump the fish?
Yeah, the arrangement that all the cities have with Pinellas County is another proactive thing that Pinellas County government has done, is that any fish that we pick up, and we take it to the landfill, they waive the tipping fees, they're not going to charge us. And one thing that I didn't mention is that, and we'll hope we don't get there, is if we get to the point where we were having trouble keeping up with the pickup of fish on our beach, which would take a lot for that to happen. That's another benefit of this DRC group, is that we can call them and they'll come in and pick up what we can't manage, and the counties do the money they get from the state is picking up the tab for that. So
Thank you.
Is there anyone else who has a question or comment for the city manager? Yes, ma'am.
Greg, we got a big document with the Ed study for ICON.
Yeah.
Is that going to come up to the commission?
yeah, I sent y'all an email. It's on the October city commissioner agenda.
Missed that thing.
I know it's been probably a couple months ago when Gene was in here for the finance board. And I know a couple of people that have put in applications right after that, and we've had meetings. I'm just wondering, what's the delay on appointing people to try to get that board?
The clerk this week put out the agenda, the draft agenda for October, and it will be on the October agenda. I think we actually have 4 or 5 applicants now for that.
Okay, I was just wondering why it took so long. I know you asked for it, but I didn't know how long to keep going.
Yeah, that's when it'll be on the agenda.
Any other questions for the city manager? At this time, Phil, this is during the city commission and it's your turn to, do you have any comments today?
I think there's some heavy items on the agenda, and I'm going to pass on my time so we can get to the center.
I would
Commissioner
agree.
Coleman?
Yeah.
Okay. Vice Mayor? Any comments tonight?
I would just like to thank people who are serving the country tonight and extend for a few more seconds the moment of silence that we observed in the opening of the meeting. Thanks.
Be great. 5 more seconds. Okay. Phil Robel?
Just real quick, I know when we were talking last week about Deanne's raise and all that, you offered, I'd like to see something on the city managers that included, you know, the city managers' salaries for all the Pinellas cities and their duties and whether they have police, fire, and all that. I just would like to request that. I don't know who I requested to.
Ed?
And I was hoping under additions and deletions that we could add a discussion item entitled Charter Officer Evaluation, and I have some thoughts about what Bill was bringing up as well.
Okay. Do we have a consensus to do that?
Relative to what? I'm sorry, Mayor, are we,
Adding an agenda item?
okay, so
As far
within
as-
addition solutions, okay, thank you,
Yes,
just
sir.
trying to clarify.
Okay, no problem. Ed, do you have anything else?
Was there consensus?
Yes, there is a consensus.
So consensus is to add the matter that Commissioner Hoofnagel or Vice Mayor Hoofnagel just raised to the agenda for this evening.
Yes, sir. I'm just going to give you a schedule of events that are coming up in the near future so that you're aware of them. On October 4th will be my Monday with the mayor, which I have once a month from 4 to 7, and anyone who would like to come to the city auditorium, I will be here for any kind of discussion items that you might want to talk about. We had 20 at the last one, so that was very good. Every month I've been having more, so I think it's a good idea that we're having them. September 13th at 6 p.m. is the homeowners happy hour with Guppies at Guppies. September 26th, Wednesday at 9 a.m., our city hosts the Big C, which is the Barrier Island Governmental Council. And that is a meeting that's once a month, and it takes place in each city. This, like I said, this month is the city of Indian Rocks Beach. They serve breakfast, and anyone who would like to participate may come and listen to some of the agenda items that have to do with all of the beach communities. And you're more than welcome to come. October 6th is the Invasion hippie thing for the homeowners, and that'll be on a Saturday from 4 to 10 p.m. And October 8th, Monday, is A2K at 6 p.m. I would like to just address the turnout. There were, I believe, over 60 people at the park this weekend, and I would encourage anybody who would like to be involved in the community from time to time. There was a total weeding, and if you go by and look at our county park, it looks absolutely beautiful. So I encourage you to get in touch with Julie Hoffnagel at A2K if you would so desire. We have made an item on agenda additions and deletions already, so we will go ahead to the consent agenda. And at this time, Randy, please read the consent agenda only.
Consent agenda for the meeting of September 11th, 2018, items A through G. Item A, approval of the August 13, 2018 City Commission meeting minutes. Item B, confirming action taken during the September 4, 2018 Special City Commission meeting. Item C, resolution number 2018-07, nominating an elected official to Fort Pinellas serving as the Planning Council and the Metropolitan Planning Organization. Item D, authorizing the city manager to execute a renewal agreement with Public Risk Management for group health insurance coverage for fiscal year 2018-19. Item E, authorizing the city manager to sign and approve a one-year agreement for property casualty, workers' compensation, and flood insurance coverages with Public Risk Management of Florida for fiscal year 2018-19. Item F, authorizing the city manager to enter into a contract with the Pinellas County Sheriff's Office for fiscal year 2018-19 law enforcement services. Item G, approval of the September 4, 2018 Special City Commission meeting minutes. This has been a reading of the items on the consent agenda by title only, all items A through G, Mayor.
Thank you. Is there a motion to approve?
Motion to approve the consent agenda.
And is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. Agenda item 6A, ordinance 2017-15 is the second and final reading. Public hearing. Randy, would you please read this agenda item?
Happily, Mayor. City of Indian Rocks Beach ordinance number 2017-15. An ordinance of the City of Indian Rocks Beach, Florida, repealing Article 5, Plan Unit Development by deleting sections 110-641, through 110-652 concerning the purpose, applicability, content, and review of planned unit developments, and replacing them with Article 5, Planned Unit Development District, by adding sections 110-641 through 110-652 concerning the purpose, applicability, content, and review of planned unit developments, providing for renumbering, providing for severability, providing for resolution of conflicts, and providing for an effective date. This has been a second reading of ordinance number 2017-15 by title only. Between first reading and second reading, the only revisions were to Scrivener's errors, typos that I found in reviewing it following the last meeting. Other than that, I defer to the city manager if there's any stuff to report on that.
I don't have any comment unless y'all have any questions.
Does anyone on the city commission have a question or comment for either Randy or the city manager? Okay, at this time, then I will open the public hearing, and anyone who would like to make a comment on this agenda item may come forward, and you have 3 minutes to speak. Please state your name and address. Hearing none, I will close the public hearing. Is there a motion on this agenda item?
Motion to approve 2017-15.
Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Hannah made the motion, Vice Mayor Hufnagle made the second. Is there any comments? Is there any? Deanne, would you please call the roll?
Commissioner Wanda,
Yes.
Commissioner Lavelle,
Yes.
Commissioner Vice Mayor Hufnagle,
Yes.
Commissioner Hannah,
Yes.
Mayor Kennedy.
Yes. Our next agenda item is ordinance number 2018-01, which is a second and final reading and public hearing. Randy, would you please read the agenda item?
Yes, Mayor.
And present the report.
Yes, Mayor. City of Indian Rock Beach, ordinance number 2018-01. An ordinance of the Board of Commissioners of the City of Indian Rocks Beach, Florida, incorporating recitals as findings of fact, amending Chapter 110 of the city's land development regulations to add Article 9, short-term vacation rentals, adding Section 110-840, establishing applicability, adding Section 110-841, establishing definitions, adding Section 110-842, establishing minimum registration requirements for short-term vacation rentals, adding Section 110-843, establishing standards for the operation of short-term rentals, adding Section 110-844, establishing the requirements and duties of designated responsible parties, adding Section 110-85, establishing minimum requirements for rental use agreements, adding Section 110-846, concerning required postings on short-term vacation rentals, adding Section 110-847, establishing violations, adding Section 110-848, establishing the remedies, penalties, and enforcement mechanisms for violations of this article, providing for codification and revision of Scrivener's errors, providing for full force and effective ordinance, providing for severability, and providing for an effective date. This has been a second and final reading of ordinance number 2018-01. This is, as I stated before, the second reading. The substantive changes between first and second reading in this instance. There was a minor change to the title to correct Scrivener's errors and amend the title to reflect a change in another section, that's 110-843. Section 110-841, the definition section. In the definition of public lodging establishment, thanks to the vigilance of a dedicated member of the public, there was a change in a conjunction, or disjunction, to a conjunctive, or to an and, as an oversight of a definition that had been changed multiple times. And there was an or that was a relic that was made and to make that definition more cohesive. Section 110-842, this enhanced the explanation on exceptions relative to getting DBPR approval and DOR approval, and I'll expound on that in a moment. 110-843, vacation rental standards. Per the consensus of this body, I added language concerning the advertising requirement. It was requested that we insert language stating that once a party secures their business tax receipt from the town, or from the city rather, they will be given a business tax receipt number. That number should be on any ads that the property owner affirmatively creates, whether written or digital. And 110-845, addressing concerns raised by the public in this commission concerning the inclusion of age and name for all guests, as that's not data that's typically available for all rentals. This is, I anticipate that many of you here, this is what you came to see. Welcome to the show. I am, for those of you who have not been, the city attorney. For those of you who this is your first meeting seeing this issue, I want you to understand that the ordinance that is before you is the product of an extensive process. This has been workshopped, heard, run by individual committees within the city over the course of the last year and a half. This is an attempt at balancing the equities and interests of all shareholders. We know there are shareholders in this community who feel as though short-term rentals should not operate. This is not about that. We know there's also shareholders in the community who feel they should operate unfettered and unrestricted in any way. There is no ordinance that I have ever drafted or that I could draft on this matter that would please all parties. And with that, this is an attempt at reconciling all of those interests. At its base, at its core, the new or more explicit requirements for short-term rentals are as follows. Pay your taxes. Though this is arguably already a requirement, it was made more explicit by this language. To that end, I am and have been fully aware of the fact that the platform Airbnb or Airbed and Breakfast, however you choose to call it, already has agreements in place with taxing authorities as to how they administer that. Previously, in the section on this minimum requirements, it read, obtaining a Florida Department of Revenue certificate of registration for purposes of collecting and remitting tourist development taxes, etc., if applicable. I explained at the last meeting that if applicable was added to contemplate that where those agreements are in place between the host company and the owner of the vacation rental, that would not be applicable in that posture. It's already handled. However, in an effort to make that more explicit, as this was a concern I was consistently receiving following that meeting, I have added language that states as follows. In the events items 1 or 2 above are not applicable to the property, item 1 is the Department of Revenue certificate, item 2 is the Department of Business and Regulation certificate or license. The property owner shall provide a written statement and any supporting documentation setting forth the reason the requirement does not apply. The city manager and his or her designee shall make a final determination as to the applicability of these minimum requirements for a short-term vacation rental. This language was added to specifically address the concern of these peer-to-peer host networks. How that is handled is really an administrative issue. How I envision or how that may operate is as simple as stating, executing something that certifies that a vacation rental owner only advertises their property on Airbnb. Airbnb has this in place and therefore this documentation cannot be secured. It allows for the discretion of the city staff because a homeowner simply stating it is the case doesn't necessarily make it so. So that is to say, if somebody says, well, I only advertise on Airbnb, but staff has evidence or reason to believe that you in fact also operate on other platforms where that arrangement is not in place, then it still remains applicable. So that's what that language addresses. That was one of probably the most substantive change between first and second reading. I want to be very clear about what this ordinance is and what this ordinance is not in the event there are people who have received misinformation or are unclear. This ordinance does not ban short-term rentals in Indian Rocks Beach. This city, it does not restrict the duration or frequency of short-term rentals in the city of Indian Rocks Beach. That is by design. That is because the Florida legislature has made it such that this body cannot regulate that going forward. And so it does not regulate that. If you've been told that short-term rentals will be banned in Indian Rocks Beach, you've been misinformed. What this does, as I've stated, is it requires payment of taxes. Per the consensus of this body, it now requires that where you've posted an advertisement, once you have that tax number, that it's posted to that advertisement, whether in print or digital media. And the final substantive requirement or restriction, if you will, is that there should be a sign out front that identifies who the person or persons of contact should be in the event there's an issue on the property. In taking the input of people who operate short-term rentals and realtors alike, this language was amended over the course of workshopping and instituting the first and second reading to contemplate the possibility that a property management company could be that designated responsible party, and also to realistically allow for more than one individual to be a designated responsible party so as no one person is duty-bound to be at the property at all times, always, every day of the year. So with that, that's really the substantive elements of what's being imposed here. I know for those of you who have been invested in this discussion from day one, I had an analogy some time ago of Coke Zero, Diet Coke, and Coke as far as there's different ways we can approach this issue. This commission has chosen not to simply implement, or rather not to simply enforce its existing ordinances, but it's also explicitly contemplated and declined to impose a very restrictive ordinance, which it has the ability to do, that regulates all aspects of short-term rentals except duration and frequency. This was an attempt at reconciling those two ends of the spectrum while still finding a solution that allows for the city to address the concerns of its residents, allows industry to operate, and does not create significant costs for the city in the terms of administrative structure. So with that, I'm sure all of you did not come here to hear me talk. I ask that as you come forward, that you be mindful that this is the second and final reading of this ordinance. We've given great thought through the substantive aspects of this ordinance. The city is aware of the strong feelings on both sides and hopes that as we move forward, that this can be a step towards reconciling those interests. And with that, I tender the meeting back to you, Mayor.
Does anyone on the city commission have questions or comments for the city attorney at this time?
Not for the city attorney, but I know we all received like 40 to 45 emails that were a copy and paste email. And I emailed back some of the people that said that. All I wanted to know was, with this group of people, I don't know how many there were exactly, but they're saying that the ordinance currently being debated by the city council places undue burdens on vacation rental owners that may deter some owners from continuing in the industry or prevent some from using their property for this purpose. If any of those people here, I would like to know exactly what that is that's in this ordinance that's going to do this.
Okay, well,
Thank you.
under public hearing, we'll let them speak on
Because
that.
nobody answered.
Okay. Vice Mayor, do you have any questions for the city attorney?
No, ma'am.
Okay. Commissioner Hannon? Okay, at this time, we're going to open the public hearing. Please come up, state your name, your address, and you will have 3 minutes to speak on the issue of short-term rentals.
Hi, my name is Carla Stahl. I own property at 1000 Gulf Boulevard in the Reef Club condominium building. We've owned the property for 6 years, and I would like to say that I support the ordinance. I guess I'm one of those renters or rental owners that goes the extra mile, but I feel that this ordinance will go a long way to leveling the playing field among rental owners and short-term renters. Our condo, of course, because it's a condo building, has sprinkler systems. We provide fire extinguishers and other things that were not required before this, as far as I know. I know for a fact that there are some people in our building who advertise and their rentals as not having taxes collected and do not collect taxes and remit them to the city, or to the state, which puts me as a law-abiding rental agent, a rental owner, at a disadvantage. So I welcome the enforcement of that. My 2 questions are, first of all, you addressed Airbnb, and I'm not exactly sure how that will work because Airbnb, as far as I know, does not collect the taxes on our behalf. We're still responsible for remitting those. And also, what is the policy or the projected method of dealing with HomeAway or VRBO rentals, which I'm on both platforms. Both of those, as far as I know, do not issue 1099s to their owners unless it reaches a certain threshold of rentals that mine never does. And so the onus is on the rental owner to be law-abiding and remit that as required, which again, as I said, some do not. And also I would like to know if there's anything that can be done regarding some of the off-beach properties with respect to the fact that, for instance, at our condo, we have had a numerous influx of renters that are perhaps renting a house, let's say on 10th or 11th Avenue, and they're either told or misinformed that they can have access. If you go to this building, you can use their pool because they don't have any security. So that is increasing the burden on us in our building to try to find ways to keep people who aren't our renters out of the building. And we have in fact had people arrested for trespassing in the past, but because we are largely a non-owner occupied building, it's hard to do that with any regularity. We've also had to tow cars, etc. So I'm in favor of enforcement, and I don't think that anything in my mind that's been proposed is a burden. I'm sorry if others do, but this is a business. If you're operating it like a business, there are requirements of businesses no matter what kind you own. So I'm just interested in making sure that we cover all the bases and that we understand how the enforcement is going to happen. So, thank you.
Anyone else who'd like to speak?
My name is Bill Thomas. I live at 470 20th Avenue. And I do agree that we do need an ordinance. And I'm not totally against the ordinance. I just want to make sure the ordinance is equitable and works for all parties. And Randy, what you mentioned beforehand, some of the changes, I pulled up what was on the website here, and it doesn't jive with what you were saying that's been changed on the ordinance. So it still says it requires, you know, the tax receipts and everything in there, and it doesn't give any out for Airbnb. So what is the latest draft of this? And that should be available to the public because this came out on Friday. This is a Tuesday. And that's not enough time for people to go through to see, can I conform to this?
Can you address, are you finished, Bill?
I think Randy covered everything except I want to be clear about minors having to have their name and address. Is that going to be something that's going to be voted on tonight to see if they want minors' name and addresses recorded also?
It's already been stricken.
Oh, it has been. See, it hasn't been stricken in the version that's on your webpage.
We'll address
So
that one.
it's still out there. So I'm working from, I guess, the original one that hasn't been changed. So I would really appreciate it if you let the public know what the new requirements are before you have a meeting here and we're supposed to speak about anything tangible. And last and not least, I still think that the individual leases. I don't believe that you have individual leases with Airbnb either. Airbnb has a platform where there's an agreements with the guests, and the hosts have the agreements, the rental leases, with Airbnb, not with each individual host that comes in. So there will not be a separate lease agreement between the host and the guest. It's between Airbnb and the guest and Airbnb and the host. And that's the way it works. So if that could be helped out, then I'm fine, I'm ready to go. And I do respect our neighborhoods. I want our neighborhoods to stay the way they are now, and that's why we moved here. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Bill. Do you want to address the...
Not at this point.
No?
Okay.
Okay. We'll wait. Okay. Is there anyone else who'd like to come up and speak at this time?
Hi, I'm Terry Rowland. I live at 215 Indian Rocks Beach. I'm a little late to the game, so I just read this last week. So I'm getting ready to buy a property in front of a building, so it's all commercial. But long term, I'm going to buy more properties, but I want to do it more out here in the housing. And to me, when I read this, and I could be wrong about the way I'm interpreting it, is I'm a little concerned about posting my name and phone number on the outside of the building people realizing it's a rental and calling that number in the middle of the night, having me drive over, and, you know, for safety's sake, I don't think that's a great idea. And I don't plan on using a property management company until I get enough properties to turn that over. So my concern was safety and posting your name and phone number outside.
Thank you, Terry.
Good evening, Joe Farrell with the Pinellas Realtor Organization. I'm here on behalf of our members, the Realtors community. And I guess I want to echo some of the previous sentiments. You know, our goal here is not to be in favor or against vacation rentals or short-term rentals in any way. Like Randy says, they're here whether we like it or not. Our goal is to basically help craft an ordinance that will stand the test of time and, as best we can, move the community forward and everyone be happy with the situation. There are going to be people that are upset or anyway, and that's unfortunate, but our goal is to hopefully make as many people possible. And by doing that is by, in our opinion, is to identify policies that can weed out the really bad actors, the ones that cause the problem. And what the woman before me just said is something that we are a little concerned about. It's not so much that there's a plate on the house that says it's a vacation rental on contact info. It's who's the contact info is. And thank you, Randy, for taking in the fact that we thought multiple people should be assigned, or could be assigned to a property as an agent, property manager. But the other issue we have is that quite often, when you are a neighbor of a property and you call and you complain about something, it's 1 in the morning. There's a lot of noise, or there's garbage, or there's 7,000 cars. There's a lot of times could be alcohol or drugs involved. What you're asking is, when there's problems at these properties, is for a property owner or agent of that property and a neighbor to mitigate or just work out the issue. And quite honestly, emotion and, like I said, the other things can get involved, and that can create dangerous situations. Our suggestion is either the contact person being a code enforcement officer, a law enforcement, a contact information for them, not a specific person, but the department, and someone could be on call for that, figuring out what best to move forward. A mitigating agency, if you will, or factor in the middle to kind of that has their cool head about them for this issue. We do have the fears of safety, but we also have the fears of just harassment on both sides. I mean, either way. If this is going to work, both sides have to be good on this. Hosts and guests, neighbors, owners, everyone. So that's our suggestion. Maybe we look at that and maybe go in a different direction with either law enforcement or code enforcement being the person on there. We've experienced this with vacant property registries, and it's great when law enforcement contacts the realtor who's in charge of that vacant property. The neighbor next door is upset and continuously complains about the same thing. Eventually, the agent just stops and starts ignoring them, and then we don't know. So by doing this, I think we can also create some good data. The city will keep the data, or the law enforcement will keep the number of calls. As they came here and explained the number of calls and where they go out there, what they go out there for. You can also use this data to identify the problem properties and or problem neighbors, whatever it may be. So that's the one issue we have moving forward. Even if it can't be fixed today, we do believe it's something that can be fixed long term. So thank you.
Is there anyone else who'd like to come forward?
I get my time now.
Yes, Ruth.
My name is Ruth Coopy. I live at 104 11th Avenue. And I am a short-term rental person, as well as experiencing the changes. I've had my rental now since I bought my home back in 2009. So I've been here for a while to see all the changes that are going on with the beaches and people actually moving down from Clearwater because it's so densely populated and wanting to rent in our wonderful community. And I really, I advocate that as part of our economy. However, there is no regulation as to the occupancy number. And what I'm seeing on my street alone is that I have a small apartment and I limit it. I had it on VRBO, I've done it on other sites, and I have a number that I restrict my occupancy to. And I also can provide tax records when I get my permit every year, which I think would be a good way of maintaining, some of the fiscal part of all of this. But my point is that I have rentals down the street where they're renting out, and I literally counted 22 people including children and maybe 4 or 5 adults coming out of a duplex. I mean, that's a lot of people. And the amount of waste when I was walking my dog in the morning is also creating a burden for our community. So I really would like to see something within this regulation, if we can, when you get a permit, that in the fire inspection, I think that's great that we provide safety also in inspections on these quarters, because you don't know what's going on in there. But the whole point is that I really think that there should be an occupancy limit. And I know in the summer months I have a lot of issues with people that are renting. They come over from Tampa, and then all of a sudden I live at my rental. So I would experience 15 people in my backyard, and I rent it to a couple. So I have the ability to say, hey, get the heck out, but there's a lot of rentals in this community where it's not occupied, and you don't have that, and it can ultimately end up in a lot of problems with the neighborhood, as we had just presented. So that's my point, and I know we can't do it, but occupancy numbers maybe on that permit, I don't know, or and providing you with records of my tax payment or statements. I do that every single quarter or every single month. For some people, I don't have that high of a volume, so I'm a quarterly person, but anyway, so thank you.
My name is Daniel Hale. I live at 2311 Bay Boulevard. I own Indian Rocks Laundromat, IRB Laundromat. I also have vacation rentals. And I live in the property that I rent out, so therefore I have control of the people. If there's a stipulation in the regulations where we can provide that information, it might be helpful to make sure that the rules are implemented, that we can control the amount of people that are renting in our properties. If we have that, maybe we can keep the number of people under control. But it's only because you live there that you want to do that. And I don't know about the people who don't live there, but that's not where I can have any control. So maybe a stipulation, property owners who live there, and rentals, a little bit more leniency on that factor, and the others, a little bit more restriction. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Dan.
I'm Laura Lindsay. I own a home at 115 12th Avenue. I do serve as a short-term rental there. I would like to speak to the posting of the phone number on the front of the structure. So what we're talking about tonight primarily are single-family homes. My concern with posting that, certainly the safety of whoever is answering the phone, the protection of the property and not advertising the fact that it is potentially vacant. I'd like to thank our sheriff for his presentation at the beginning and sharing with us much of the mischief that goes on in Indian Rocks Beach. And it wouldn't be difficult to connect that if you're seeing 52 suspicious persons, if those persons are walking up and down the streets of this town and able to easily identify which homes are vacation rentals, they're easily identified as when they're available. All someone then has to do is pull up on their phone to say, oh gee, look, that home is available for the next 5 nights. How about I have my way there for the next 5 nights, or tonight, or anytime. As a logistical matter, I'm not interested in manning my phone 24 hours a day to anybody who happens to see my number on my front of my house, and I'm also not interested in paying someone else to monitor that phone line 24 hours a day. I'm not interested in being fined if it's not answered 24 hours a day. So those are all the reasons that I don't think that's a good idea at all. I also think it's redundant because we already have registering ourselves with the city as the owner and as the point of contact. So I think if an entity in the city, such as law enforcement, first responders, code enforcement, have a need to reach the owner, they are entitled to that information and to access to the owner. I don't think that passersby are entitled to that information. I would like to request that there is an accurate copy of the ordinances that's provided to the public before it is passed. Since I guess there were revisions, there certainly were since the copy that I have. In addition to that, I see that there is a section of safety codes inspections that would have passed at the time that the building was built, with the exception of the Swimming Pool Act, which is more recent. That act does include having a fence not only around your property to keep people from the outside in, but having a fence from the inside of your home out to your swimming pool. That wouldn't have been the code when my home was constructed. It's not something that I'm interested in doing. It would be quite an awkward barrier in a very small bungalow property. My last little tidbit would just be, you know, I see it being called transient housing. I think they're guests in our city.
Thank you, Melissa.
You're welcome.
Is there anyone else at this time who'd like to speak on this issue?
Hi there. Lori Giesking, 10 and 12 Gulf Boulevard, representing Cypress and Sun condominiums. We certainly have our fair share of owners who do short-term rental. It's in our condo docs, so we're already incredibly well protected as it comes to occupancy and things like that. Where my strong concern is that since I live there and several other owners live there, there's only 8 units total, but when you put a sign on the front door of any property that basically lists it as a property rental, all you're doing is asking for more transient, homeless type trouble. I've already had more than my fair share of it. We had to register our property so that we could have a trespassing warrant issued against someone who was sleeping on the balcony. And that puts me in danger. And I live there, and that's not what I want. So that signage thing, I think before this goes to a final vote, I realize it's a second reading, but I'd like to see like a sample sign of what you're talking about before you guys go to final vote. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Hugh Burton, 1102 Beach Trail. It seems like what everybody's talking about here tonight is really one issue, which is responsibility. I've been a homeowner for many, many years. I've been a landlord for many, many years. I'd like to think I've been a responsible landlord. And unfortunately, within any community, it appears that there are small groups of people that are perhaps not as responsible as we'd like them to be. The commission is tasked with a very difficult challenge, which is how we get people to become more responsible. I found over time, fines seem to get people in line. What I've witnessed here since I've been back on the beach is, and I think I mentioned this at the last meeting, was increased noise, increased trash, poor maintenance of properties. And again, it's not all properties, and I think it's the one of the speakers mentioned. There's a property near me, I won't mention what it is, but there were at least 10 to 12 cars in their parking lot. Had there been a fire, that would not have been a good outcome. I'm just letting everybody know. It would have been a very sad outcome at that. So perhaps the commission might want to consider within the ordinance, if there are so many registered complaints against the property because the property owner is not a responsible landlord, that perhaps they get fined somehow and to get their property in line. And I've always found that if you follow the money trail, that usually keeps people in line. Thank you.
Is there anyone else who would like to speak at this time on the vacation rental ordinance? Okay, I'll close the public hearing.
Mayor, if I may.
Yes, sir.
I'd like to address some of the points raised and address them in succession. Insofar as there was a comment made that the materials posted on the website are not consistent with what I've described, I think there's a little bit of confusion relative to the item that is pinned at the home page versus the actual circulated agenda materials. I think the pinned item from the homepage tracks to the previous version, and the actual circulated agenda materials do in fact contain the revisions. To that end, I will revisit and say with specificity what the changes are between the last version and this version. I've corrected typos in the title and amended the title to reflect the broader change made to section 110-843 concerning the advertising requirement. In section 110-841, the definitions section, there was, under the definition of transient public lodging establishment, which allows me to also make the point, this applies to homes in the single-family, medium-density RM2 or RM1 districts. But in the previous version, it said a structure which is rented to guests more than 3 times in a calendar year for periods of less than 30 days or more, or 1 calendar month, whichever is less, or which is advertised or held out to the public as a place rented to guests within the aforementioned districts. That or has been changed to an and again, that was a relic of several revisions in not capturing that article, but it has since been captured, if you will, and amended. The second substantive or third substantive change is in section 110-842 concerning the exceptions for the peer-to-peer remittance of taxes, if you will. This is the element of where Airbnb does in fact facilitate remittance of taxes and therefore limits the ability of owners to provide certain documentation requested insofar as it requires a Department of Revenue certificate or Department of Business and Professional Regulation license. After the 3 stated clauses, obtaining a DOR, obtaining, it says upon initial adoption of this section, owners of short-term vacation rentals shall have 45 days to submit documentary evidence. After the period in that sentence, it now adds in the event items 1 or 2 above are not applicable to the property owner shall provide a written statement and any supporting documentation setting forth the reason the requirement does not apply. For example, I only rent my home via Airbnb. Airbnb handles this administratively, therefore I cannot provide this. The city manager or his or her designee shall make a final determination as to the applicability of these minimum requirements for a short-term vacation rental property. And that's so that there is some discretion and evaluation of those claims made. It allows for that determination. That is the substantive change in where that language appears. As, excuse me, the next revision is in section 110-843, the advertising requirement. Within 110-843, there is a new number 3, the other standards, that was 3 is now number 4, and advertising requirement says all advertising for vacation rental units shall identify the city-issued business tax receipt number associated with the advertised rental property. The vacation business tax receipt number shall be included on all advertising, including but not limited to print and internet-based advertising. Advertisements that do not contain this information or that contain inaccurate information shall be deemed a violation of this section and subject to penalties set forth in 110-848, which is the fine structure later in the ordinance. And that language was included based on the consensus of this body at its last meeting on this matter during first reading. The last change is the lease agreement, 110-845, concerning the names and ages. Previously, there was language requiring the name and age of all guests. It now reads, I'm sorry, one moment, I'm tracking throughout an extensive document. The rental lease or recorded usage agreement, this is 2A, must contain the following information at a minimum: the name of the primary responsible lessor who will be occupying the unit. That previously included language of the names and ages of all guests. It now says the name of the primary responsible lessor who will be occupying the unit. Those are the substantive changes between first reading and second reading. To the extent that there was any confusion or miscommunication in the way the drafts were posted to the website. Those materials have been available, but I can understand how that confusion may have arisen. I think I've addressed how that happened. To the extent condominium properties or other property owners have concerns about people using your resources, that is your pool, your parking spots, etc., those are private issues that you can continue to handle privately as you've done in the past. The concern relative to contacting law enforcement, I want to be very clear that nothing in this ordinance prohibits or bars a property owner or resident from contacting law enforcement to make them aware of this concern. If you feel you're not getting an adequate response, or you don't feel like you're not comfortable using that number, nobody is stating that is the person that a complaining party must contact, but it does make it so that law enforcement or someone else knows who to contact if they are contacted and need to resolve the matter. But there's nothing, I just want to be clear, there's nothing in the ordinance as drafted that bars a member of the public from contacting law enforcement. And in fact, I think this body has on more than one occasion encouraged that because of the enhanced reporting element that comes with the Pinellas County Sheriff's Office handling that. For those of you who are less familiar with the community, this city does not have its own police department and contracts for law enforcement services with the Pinellas County Sheriff's Office. There was a question about owner-occupied, or rather, the next point that was raised was regarding occupancy restrictions. This body has explicitly considered that at every stage of this drafting process. They have declined to include occupancy restrictions for a handful of reasons, one of which is the difficulty with which that is enforced. What is to say that somebody says, well, they're just here to watch the game and they're going home, they're not an occupant. The added element of that is that there are other communities who have included such language and are now facing, for that and other reasons involving the way that they've regulated short-term rentals, are facing multi-million-dollar litigation, and that was a risk that this body declined to take in regulating this issue. Another question arose about how owner-occupied properties are treated in this ordinance. I want to make it very clear the required posting of the designated responsible party in the current draft, it is specifically provided that owner-occupied in the responsible party. It says, as it discusses that sign, which is in section, sorry, my mouse is betraying me. Section 110-844, it says this requirement shall not apply in instances where the owner occupies a portion or division of the short-term vacation rental as his or her primary residence. So that sign, if you are an owner-occupied property, that sign is not a requirement, and that again is based on consensus of this body in response to concerns raised at previous meetings. The next point that was raised concerned the use, the terminology in this ordinance. One of the challenges when drafting legislation, and this is legislation even at the local level, is trying to find language that appropriately captures what's at issue and is consistent with other regulatory schemes. The use in this case, for example, of transient public lodging establishment aligns with language in the fire code, aligns with language in the county's land use regulations, and with language in our own code elsewhere. And so that language was not pulled to as a branding mechanism. When drafting legislation, unfortunately, it's not always as simple as the what would be the most PR friendly, if you will. I agree, and I think this body agrees, that we understand that tourism underpins a large part of this in all beach communities, and that these are guests in the community that serve a valuable role in the economy and experience of being part of Indian Rocks Beach, and that terminology is not intended as a slight, but rather to be consistent with the regulatory schemes in place. Finally, the last substantive comment that I heard concerned registered complaints leading to augmented fines. This body has also considered that point in the course of evaluating and drafting this ordinance. That particular language was not included, was for a reason that has already been noted in other public comments, which is the inclusion of phone numbers or the ability to call law enforcement is not dispositive of anything. Maybe there are neighbors who do have a dispute, and I'm willing to call law enforcement much more frequently just to show you I don't like you. That's not just because law enforcement shows up to your property does not mean you've actually violated the code or any provision. And so just because somebody makes a complaint, in this country and in our legal system, you have due process. You have the ability to be heard. And so just because somebody makes a complaint does not mean that you've actually violated. So tracking the numbers of complaint unto itself is not this body is considered to not be a reasonable and fair mechanism for tracking whether somebody's actually for purposes of this discussion, good neighbor or good owner. And so that number of complaints itself. Now, if you have multiple violations, each violation comes with a higher fine, and that is one way that this body is tracking that within this ordinance. I think that addresses the concerns raised by the public. I'm happy to address any concerns raised by this dais now that that public comment is closed. I'd like to thank the public. I'd like to thank industry, as I'll call it, Airbnb, the Realtors Association, and other groups have affirmatively reviewed these, and they've provided their own comments. Some have been incorporated, some have been declined. That's the process. We've also received input from residents as recently as a week ago and made substantive changes based on that information. And so I hope that it's clear to this community that this has been a collaborative process. If not imperfect, it is collaborative. And so with that, I tender it back to you, folks. If you have any further direction, concerns, I'm happy to address them. I'd like to make it very clear that this is the second and final reading. If you are to change any language at this point, that needs to be done with specificity so that as the public knows what is coming, you know what you're voting on. We're not at a point any longer where we can say, well, the city manager and the city attorney, generally this is what we want to see finesse it. If you do make any amendments going forward, I just ask that you be very clear. Other than that, thank you all. Thank you for your careful attention to this. Thank you for reviewing all the materials, starting with my memorandum that I think first circulated nearly 2 years ago on this. And we'll continue to adapt. The last point I'd like to make, because there was somebody running for office who raised the point, is about home rule. There is an element of that that's at issue here. What I do want to raise the caveat that we are trying to adapt. This community is trying to adapt based on the existing legal landscape. It does remain possible that because we are subject to regulations in Tallahassee, that as the legislature convenes in the coming session, they may pass legislation that says everything we just did is null, not specific to Indian Rocks Beach. But there have been, over the last few sessions, bills introduced that say any regulation passed since 2011 specific to short-term vacation rentals shall be inapplicable, and any restriction on short-term rentals must be a restriction applied to all houses or all structures in the community, some language or permutation thereof. But I think you're getting what I'm saying. The point I'm making is there was a restriction put in place at some point. There's a magic date that we talked about extensively here. Since then, since the preemption of 2011 and 2014, different communities throughout this state have adapted in a number of ways. There are legislative efforts to say, even that adaptation is too much, get out of regulating this, cities and communities, leave it to the state, we know best. And with that, that always remains, whether that is wise or not is a decision for legislators like yourselves to make. I'm not commenting on that. I just want it to be very clear that as we adopt this, if the adoption of this adaptation is somehow challenged or invalidated by Tallahassee at a later date, that's not a failing of this body, that's not a failing of this community, that's a product of the legislative process. And the remedy for that is in Tallahassee. It's not at this dais, it's not in this room. That's the legislative process, and if you have concerns about that, I encourage you to get involved. But beyond that, that's the last bit I'll say on this matter.
Before we go ahead, I think you, the city manager, would like to make a comment.
Yeah. Just one other clarity about what was released or posted. When the clerk put out the press release with the agenda packet, the agenda packet is posted on the website. So the latest version of the ordinance is on there. the pin went on there, it's just so you've got the previous and the latest, but the latest is on the website.
At this time, Commissioner Robel, would you like to start with any comments you might have?
Not really, just we worked on this for a long, long time, and I'm sure that, over the years, we'll work more on it over the coming months, what happens in Tallahassee, and going forward. And as I've always told people, if you have trouble with one next to you, and there's problems, call the police. It's as simple as that.
Do any of the other commissioners have any comments to make before I ask for a motion?
Yeah, I just will renew my concern with the signs and public information being on properties. I know we've discussed this over and over, but I still do have concerns that will lead to nuisance calls or potential safety problems.
Commissioner Hannon?
Obviously, what I heard tonight was what Nick alluded to just now relative to the signs. Randy, could you take one moment and, for clarification purposes, address the purpose of why we are doing the sign, just in case there was any confusion of it?
Yes, Commissioner. The current Section 110-846 that's the other posting. The ordinance in its current form provides for a posting. This was a product of workshopping this and extensive discussion. Admittedly, there's been divisions and people have waxed and waned in their positions on this particular issue. The posted contact information in 110-844, that was born of the concern that, one, the city and its resources has a part-time code enforcement officer who's not here at all times, and it's not even like it's 3 or 4 people. It's, I think, presently 1. In the past, it's been 2. And so the other people that are available are law enforcement, and sometimes what's happened is law enforcement has responded to the scene, has made contact with an owner of record, but that owner of record may be out of state and incapable of responding to the issue. And this because of that kind of event, it was encouraged to have somebody who could respond to the property affirmatively, understanding again, if this is an owner-occupied residence, that sign is not necessary. And the reason it's not necessary is for that very point, which I think Commissioner Hoofnagel raised when we talked about this and added that language last, is the issue that it's designed to address is not an issue if the owner resides at the property or is otherwise available. To that same end, as it relates to owner-occupied residences, one of the comments was preserving or keeping language in that owners can regulate their occupancy. Nothing in this ordinance eliminates a private property owner's rights relative to their own property. If you wish to manage your property in a particular way that goes above this, we don't need to give you that right. You have that right. You own your property. The axiomatic, this land is my land, still holds. And so I think I've answered your question.
Thank you very much.
Vice Mayor?
Yep. One of the citizens asked about how big the sign is. That's about 1 square foot. That's about the size of the sign.
Can you not hear? Is that what you?
I can hear, I just have a comment.
Okay, well, public hearing is closed at the moment.
So, just to be clear, that is about, and I have one request for you to think about. Section 110-844, responsible party, subsection number 1, posted contact information. Right now, it requires the name and phone number of the designated responsible party. What if that said the license number and phone number of the designated responsible party? Does it matter the name of the person? If we have the license number and the phone number, that would deal with some of the concerns raised about, I don't want my name up there. The license number, if someone really wanted to go and find that public information, it can be tracked down. You see that on the back of trade people's vans all the time, license, calls, dash, whatever. So perhaps changing the word name and replacing it with the word license number. Might be a modification to this code which would not eliminate the things that Randy just said are good, i.e. a law enforcement officer is there and doesn't know who to call or can't reach them, so they still have to have a responsible party, but we don't have to have Joe Smith on the sign. So something to think about. Maybe we could entertain that one word change if possible.
And for the benefit of the member of the public who asked about the sign, and this is not new language, it currently reads in describing the sign must be non-illuminated, be 1 square foot in size on each sign. The sign's background color shall be white, and the font shall be in Black Times New Roman or Arial font, and in no smaller than 48-point typeface. The sign must be constructed of weather-resistant wood or plastic, and then it goes on to say that this sign is not necessary for owner-occupied. You know, for those who think it may be silly, the degree of specification, I think we're all familiar with the idea of malicious compliance. This is to avoid the situation where somebody puts up the sign and puts it in wingdings or something like that that you can't read, or hieroglyphics. So that's why that kind of specificity is there, and to create uniformity in the design and aesthetic throughout the community. As for Commissioner Hoofnagel's recommendation, that's perfectly legal. That's for this body to decide if it wants to make that modification.
If you were going to do that, we request that it be worded as business tax receipt number, because that matches the code that we have.
Understood.
How does the rest of the commission feel about that change?
I don't have a substantive problem with that. I think it's fine. Taking somebody's or a company's name off of it helps. It's still, to me, the sign is still a safety issue and a nuisance problem, but to take care of the PII information, that probably helps.
I don't have a problem with that.
Is that, should we interpret that as consensus to make the modification?
Yes.
Okay, so by consensus, at the second reading of this ordinance, the body has determined that Section 110-844, responsible party, Section 1, posted contact information, the first sentence begins, the name and phone number of the designated responsible party. It will now read the business tax receipt number and business tax receipt and phone number of the designated responsible party as defined in this article.
Business tax receipt number, I think, right?
That's correct.
They get a number, right?
Right. Business tax receipt number, to make it clear, you don't actually have to post the receipt itself, yes. So the word name will be stricken, and business tax receipt number, which is something that all parties will still get through the city. Everybody will get a business tax receipt. This is separate from the Department of Revenue and the DBPR. The business tax receipt is unique to this community. Everybody will still, should already, but otherwise will need to get a business tax receipt. In talking with the city staff, it's my understanding that the cost of that is de minimis. This is not even, I don't think it even approaches $25. So we're not talking about a huge outlay on that end. Presently, at least, that number can always change.
Are there any other comments before the commission? I would just, before we make our vote, I would just like to conclude and say that, as one of the residents brought up tonight, that this has been a difficult issue, and that my feeling is that this entire commission has been very good stewards of our community and looking at the many facets on all sides. I spoke today to the director of Florida for the Airbnb, and his name is Kenny Montella, who we actually invited to our very first meeting to come and speak before us. And his final comment after our discussion was, Mayor, I want you to know that there are many cities that won't even talk to me. So I do think that we are interested in being fair and implementing reasonable regulations for the neighbors as well as those that own vacation rentals. And I do appreciate all of you and the commission for the hard work that has been put into this issue. I want you to know that I've served as a panelist representing a small city and how we have moved forward on this issue. And I will tell you that this is not a one-size-fits-all in which the bill that was passed by the legislators have implemented at the state level. And for instance, a city of our size, Indian Rocks Beach, compared to the city of Orlando or even St. Petersburg Beach, St. Pete Beach, our problems are, we have multiple issues and the problems are different. And that has been part of the concern and a continual learning experience for us to try to come up with an ordinance with regulations that are specific to our community. I've been asked to speak at the City of Largo, who does not have any regulations in place. And so in implementing what we're doing and trying to help some other cities with their ordinances, our city is being looked at as a prototype and how other cities move forward in the future. And as the city attorney also mentioned tonight, we could do this whole piece and vote on it tonight, and when the legislators go back into session, it could be, they could come up with something else and we'll be at square one again. So I do appreciate all of you. There were over 20 people that came to Monday with the mayor yesterday, and half were about the vacation rentals, and some were there that didn't know that they have already, they're on Golf Boulevard and they are already complying with the regulations that are needed. So I do appreciate all of you, and at this time I would like to have a motion by the commission. Is there a motion to approve?
Motion to approve ordinance 2018-01 in its second and as amended reading.
Second.
Okay. Deanne, would you call the roll?
Commissioner Romell?
Yes.
Commissioner Hannah?
Yes.
Commissioner Palumbo?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Nagel?
Yes.
Mayor Kennedy?
Yes.
Passes unanimously.
Yay!
Thank you
Thank
all.
you for coming tonight.
I just as a final point, I'd like to make a comment to those present who are, whether you're excited or not excited, but hoping to be in compliance and operate in tandem with this. Please know that city staff is meeting this week to discuss the administrative components of this. As you might imagine, we don't do the entire process before an ordinance is finally adopted, and that's again in consideration of the time and resources that a town has. So the town is meeting to create the forms, make sure they read and align with everything we've talked about. So for those of you present, or for those of you who see this on the news, or who go through the phone tree and get a text message and call from your friends, if you show up tomorrow to town hall and ask, hey, City Hall, I need the form, it's in development. They are not going to enforce against anybody starting tomorrow if you cannot be in compliance starting tomorrow. But that process has already begun.
When does the 45 days start then?
Well, the 45 days relative to applying to the Department of Revenue, et cetera, begins effective immediately. That's not something that the town
Oh, I thought it was 45 days once you voted for that, and then we have 45 days to comply to the city.
We can discuss that separately.
Oh.
Thank you.
We are now, yes,
On behalf of the staff, I request a 5-minute recess.
we can have a recess. We're going to call this meeting to order. If everyone would like to take their seats. We'll start with ordinance 6C, ordinance number 2018-05, second and final reading. Randy?
City of Indian Rocks Beach, ordinance number 2018-05. An ordinance of the City of Indian Rocks Beach, Florida, amending the Indian Rocks Beach Code of Ordinances, amending Chapter 15, Schedule of Fees, Article 3, Planning, Zoning, Land Use, Section 15-20, public hearing fees, reducing the fees associated with planned unit developments, providing for codification, providing for severability, providing for an effective date. This is the second and final reading of ordinance number 2018-05. As stated at first reading, this was done to bring the city's fee more in line with the fees for other communities based on a survey. The city's fees were substantially higher than other fees in the community, and this is in tandem with the planned unit development ordinance that we already passed. That ordinance is designed to encourage that form of development, not make it prohibitive, and so to that same end, the fee has been altered from $7,500 to $1,500 in that same period.
Does anyone on the commission wish to have a comment or question for the city attorney? Would you like to add anything to this, Greg?
Yeah, I just would like to thank the city attorney for giving me a break tonight.
Everyone's a comedian. At this time, we'll go to the public hearing. It is now open. Would anyone like to comment on this ordinance? Hearing none, I'm looking for a motion. Is there a motion to approve?
Motion to approve ordinance number 2018-05.
Second.
Is there a second? Deanne, would you please call the roll?
Commissioner Palumbo?
Yes.
Commissioner Robel?
Yes.
Commissioner Hannah?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Hufnagel?
Yes.
Mayor Kennedy?
Yes. Item 7A, ordinance 2018-08, first reading. Randy, would you please read the ordinance by title only?
This is the first reading of City of Indian Rocks Beach ordinance number 2018-08, an ordinance of the City of Indian Rocks Beach, Florida, amending Chapter 50, Solid Waste, Article 2, Collection and Disposal, Division 1 generally, Section 50-37, Garden Trash, to increase the minimum charge of a special pickup, amending Division 2, Containers, Section 50-63, Concealment, concerning the amount of time collection bins may be left curbside, amending Section 50-66, Accessibility, concerning the period within which collection bins may be placed and must be retrieved from the curbside, amending Division 3 Fees and Charges, Section 50-91 Fee Schedule, to alter specified collection fees, providing for renumbering as necessary, providing for severability, providing for repeal of ordinances or parts of ordinances in conflict herewith to the extent of such conflict, and providing for an effective date. This has been a first reading of ordinance number 2018-08. I think the title makes it pretty clear what's being done here. One of the things, this is in some way in tandem with what we've just done on the short-term rental ordinance. One of the provisions in here makes it very clear as to when bins can be placed, when they must be retrieved. I will say, to the extent that that dovetails with the short-term rental ordinance, keeping with my cliches, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. This applies throughout the community. This is not specific only to short-term rentals as to when trash is out. There's also been a change relative to the specified fees, and with that, I'll tender it to the city manager.
You sure?
I am.
Residential, and this all, as Randy's indicated, this all is hand in hand with the pending budget. We have one more budget public hearing next week. The fee for residential will go from $25.28 per month to $27.81 per month. In commercial, which includes all our commercial and condos and that kind of thing, is a 25% increase.
Does anyone on the commission have any comments or questions for either the city manager or the city attorney on this agenda item?
Sorry.
Vice Mayor, it's all fine.
We talked about concealment of the cans, and I just want to make sure, and I know it's already in the code, but since we're bringing it up, look at it. Do we really expect them to be completely concealed from public view, or are we expecting them to be shielded or outside of the street? I mean, I have a line of sight restriction on my fence. I can't raise my fence high enough to completely shield the garbage can, and I'm sure other people have similar issues with that.
I don't mind answering that. That's not really part of, we're not amending that, but we just use common sense for that. I mean, if somebody's making an effort with a hedge or with a fence or whatever, just
shielded.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, somebody just blatantly, continually stores their can out by the curb, we'll deal with that. But it's,
yeah, I thought it had to do with at the curb versus out of sight.
No.
Okay, thank you.
Is there any other questions? I'd like to open the public hearing. Is there anyone who would like to speak on this agenda item? Hearing none, I'm looking for a motion. Is there a motion?
Motion to approve 2018-08.
And is there a second?
I'll second.
Deanne, will you please call the roll?
Commissioner Columba,
Yes.
Commissioner, Vice Mayor Hufnagel,
Yes.
Commissioner Robel,
Yes.
Commissioner Hannah,
Yes.
Mayor Kennedy.
Yes. We do not have any work session items, so I will go. I'm going to go to agenda item number 9, other business for additions, and I will turn this over to you, Mr. Hofnagel, to tell us what you'd like to say on this item.
I noticed over the past couple of years that when we were dealing with the compensation of charter officers, it was handled differently for each of the 3 officers. For the city attorney, the contract was negotiated by staff and then presented to the commission for approval. In the case of the city manager, there was a form that was presented that had various benchmarkings of salaries. Commissioner Robel mentioned that he had other questions about that benchmarking in terms of the scope of responsibility. And then in the instance of the city clerk, there was an uncomfortable discussion that was had last week for the second time about relative pay scale. My proposed solution for this is we know the way the budget year runs, that there's a time where we should be discussing performance and compensation for the charter officers. And I was hoping that perhaps in that calendar time, it could be an explicit agenda item as one suggestion. And the second suggestion is that perhaps the month prior to that or 2 months prior to that, we discuss amongst ourselves in a public forum and ask one of the commissioners to serve as a liaison to compile the required information that would aid the commission in having a consistent evaluation of the performance and compensation for the charter officers. It was not done consistently in the past, and I looked at the employment agreements of the 3 officers, and they're all different, so I understand why it was done differently, but perhaps we could put a layer of process which would streamline it, have consistency of information, and perhaps make our discussions more succinct. Thank you.
To his point, Randy, is that something that could be put to use? Is there an opportunity that one of the commissioners could be a liaison to compile all the information? Is that something that has been done in the past, or what are your thoughts on that?
My institutional memory relative to the city is limited to the last 3 or 4 years, so I can't speak to what's been done in the past in that regard. What I can say is that each of the charter officers serve at the pleasure of this body. As we colloquially say in our firm, my 5 best friends on any given night are the people sitting on either side of me. And so with that, you have the ability as a body and are tasked with supervising and appointing or removing individuals from those positions based on whatever requirements are set forth in the code for those provisions, for those positions. So short answer, there's nothing that bars you from filling out an evaluation or creating a systematic process for evaluating those positions that you supervise. And as far as I understand Vice Mayor Hufnagel's proposal, his proposal is let's make it systematic so that we know on a regular interval, this is the document that will be circulated, this is the time limit it will be filled out on, and this is the date that we will discuss it in advance of any budget items. From a legal standpoint, there's not an issue with that, if that's the question. And I hope I haven't mischaracterized what you said.
My only point is that since this evaluation is of the charter officers, those officers are the ones, you all help us all the time get ready for these meetings, and so it's kind of awkward at that point. So perhaps for this case, we would be able to work with the charter, one of us would be working with the charter officers just to make sure we have all the data consistent so that when it's presented to the commission through those mails and stuff, that at least someone has gone through and said, yeah, this looks like it's consistent for all of the officers, or, that all the information's there, as opposed to it just arriving with no I don't want to go overly bureaucratic. I'm just hoping that we could make our lives easier. That's all.
I would just add, to the extent that you have the question, just to note that in the charter, the city clerk is charged with being the custodian of all records, documents, and papers of the city. So it would stand to reason that would probably be the charter officer, whoever's in that position, who would facilitate that process if this is in place going forward.
That hasn't happened that way in the past.
Understood.
Would we like, is the board, is there a consensus to do this kind of procedure? Do any of the commissioners have any thoughts on that? I'm asking the commission first, just you, Ed?
I don't have an issue with it. I think it will provide some consistency and a model by which everything can be compared across the board and be fair.
Yeah, I'm for a fair, open process, not knowing exactly what it looks like and right this second, but yes, I think we should go forward in theory and look at a process.
Yeah, I'm fine with looking at a process put in place.
Vice Mayor, since you brought it up, would you be willing to be the liaison?
Sure. I would love to have the first time to do that, yes. Look forward to having someone take that over each year. It should be something that rotates around commission, I feel like. Yeah. And I agree, since I put my hand up, no good deed goes unpunished. So happy to assume. And I would look to either to Deanne or Greg, just helping out the dates when they should start, given the budget process and all that. I don't know when it should start, when we should have those discussions. I would like some help on that, and then yes, be happy to do the upfront work.
It's a very good idea. Appreciate it. Yes. Yes.
Just a couple of comments. One, I think it's a good idea, and I'll be happy to work with you on that since the budget's my responsibility. Secondly, unless Randy's firm doesn't have a problem with it, I don't think there's a provision in the contract we have with Randy's firm for annual performance evaluations. I don't think there's a provision in the contract for that.
I think it's cancelable at any time by the commission, so it's embedded in there, but I like it.
I take no issue with getting feedback. It helps me do my job better.
In the past, we've always had the evaluations, as you remember, going to the city attorney's office who evaluated them. He ranked them, and then he gave each commissioner the ranking.
I'm not aware of that process.
When you were in the commission, they did that. Everything was sent to the attorney's office, the evaluations, and then he would put the category and rank the average one in that ranking period.
All due respect, the 5 years that I've been here,
I'm not saying.
excuse me, all due respect, the 5 years that I've been here, I've been the one to have to initiate the evaluation process. We usually do it right after the first of the year, and that would tie into what you're saying, Ed, is that's perfect timing for it. But that, my employment agreement calls for an evaluation, Deanne's calls for evaluation, and that would be the appropriate time of year to do that.
So do we have a consensus? Is everybody in agreement? Okay. I don't think we're good on that. Everybody knows what we're going to be doing. And we'll move on to, is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Thank you for coming tonight. It was an interesting meeting.
Second.
And a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.